Hello, good morning, everybody. This is the last session for the day. I'm so glad many of you are still here and glad to see everybody and excited to be having the opportunity to talk today. My name is Baskar Subbarao. I'm the president of Zodiac Incorporated in St. Louis, Missouri. And today I want to share my experience with commissioning of federal buildings. We've been working on federal buildings for the last 14 years. And who among here have working with government projects now or in the past? Ooh. That's a lot of, almost all of them. That's great. Well, some of the things that I may say may be very familiar. My approach today has been to talk about my experience, that is from a small business perspective. And one of the things that we're going to talk about is marketing to the government or partnering with other large businesses. The second portion of the bill, my portion of the presentation is about commissioning guidelines for the federal projects. And the third part of it is executing commissioning projects with the federal government. Of course, when we have some time, we'll have some lessons learned and some questions also. This is standard AAI, and this is the copyright, which is standard. As I talked about, we'll talk about marketing to the government, partnering. We will talk about guidelines, specifically high-performance buildings and other mandates. Again, we'll also talk about the federal acquisition process as part of the marketing, the business development. The second learning objective is about commissioning guidelines. The third objective would be the commissioning documentation. And the last one would be lessons learned. Now, the US government is the single largest user of energy. And when we talk about these are the categories of where they spend the money, and the commissioning dollars is in the 7% construction. There's also some amount on the far down south. Am I too loud? No. Of course, there's some more additional money in the engineering, which is about the 35%, a small portion of the 35%. Now let's take a look at what the 7% construction is. The 7% construction turns out to be $25 billion a year. And that's a large sum of money. And the graph that you see here is an average over the last 10 years. The money, construction money goes into office, commercial, conservation, development, and public safety, and other places. So the top 10 buyers for small businesses are, a lot of them are very familiar to you, DOD, DOE, NASA, DOJ. I'm sorry, there's a lot of abbreviations. I will talk a lot of abbreviations. I don't have a glossary, but many of you may know, or you can Google them. Now, federal they own about 445,000 buildings. Every one of them have to be maintained, operated, replaced, modernized, renovated, additions, and all those type of things. That's where the building scope is. In addition, they lease about 57,000 buildings. That's a whole lot of buildings, and which requires a lot of guidelines as to how to manage them, operate them, and also commissioning that we're going to talk about. So how do we go after winning projects with the government? And this is from a small business perspective. We start very small, be prepared, understand the scope of the work, understand the marketplace, and make sure you put the best documentation in the way that the government expects you to do that. And once you do all of that stuff, you have the opportunity also to get good feedback on debriefing and other places where you meet government folks, and you ask for feedback and learn from mistakes. You go through this process, over time you will learn a lot of information, and then you tend to start working on federal projects, which will get back to past performance. Once you get back to past performance, you have all the qualifications to do a lot more additional work. So who among here is working for a small business? Okay. Now, small business is based on the NAICS code, and depends on what your company is. If you're a service-oriented company and if you're within 8 million to 16 million, then you're considered a small business. If you're a specialty trade construction, a less than 16.5 million is considered a small business. And if you're a general contractor, it's 39.5 million. Why is this important? Because the federal government has a goals of 23% of all the money they spend, they want to be able to spend towards small businesses. They want to encourage small businesses. So whether you're a large business or a small business, you have to have a small business contract plan. So that is why all of these, whether it's the small business or a small disadvantaged business, women-owned business, hub zone, they have different priorities that they're trying to meet the goal. And in many situations, they're not able to meet these goals. So they're very interested in making sure they get to this either directly with the small businesses or they want small businesses to partner with large businesses so that they can meet their goals. Now, how do you get the foot in the door? Again, a lot of them very familiar with all of this. Of course, contract opportunities are all in sam.gov. It's a Systems for Administration Award Management. There are a lot of agency websites, bidders mailing lists, online databases, a lot of places where all of this is public information. The government has to be able to do all these solicitations in an open format, and there's only very few that they can sole source, and even in their sole source, they need to be able to justify why they're sole sourcing. In order to be able to get to the government, you have to meet the buyers, make an appointment. You can make an appointment with the buyers. If you convince them, they will meet with you because they're small business development. Somebody in the small business will meet with you or at least talk to you. Or you can go to conferences. You can go to events. You can go to industry days, or a lot of networking events that goes on that you can meet the government or large businesses. Key thing is you register in sam.gov. If you're a small business, you go to pronet.sba.gov. This is a marketing website where the small business helps, the SBA helps small business be able to network with other companies to be able to go after work. DSBS, which is a dynamic small business service website, that also helps with the small business. And there's certified.sba.gov. It's all about certification because if you have to go through any of those goals, they will need your qualifications, and that qualifications is the certifications that help them meet some of their goals. Now, when you meet any federal officer, whether it's a contracting officer, a contracting rep, the one key document is the capability statement. No matter whether you're small or large business, you need to have a capability statement in a format that they would like, and that is have core competencies, differentiators, past performance, pretty much all the data that's typical business development data, but in a very structured format that they're used to seeing. And of course, you can have case studies and white papers and all those type of things that helps differentiate yourself from other companies. Now, I put together this slide trying to see how we can partner with large businesses, how small business can partner with large businesses, at the same time, how large businesses can partner with small businesses, because that's the goal of the government. What you see in there, the line over there is business development on the left and capturing awards on the right. What you see activities below would be for large businesses, and what you see above the bar will be small businesses as I click through, and we'll see some of those things. This is trying to understand the acquisition process. Now, the first thing is there's lots of online databases where the solicitations are. While large businesses are looking at solicitations, small businesses are trying to make sure that they are registered in SAM, Dun & Bradstreet, SBA, Diversity, 8A, HubZone, and all those type of things, trying to get prepared so that they can work with large businesses. Now, large businesses, while they are talking to the customers, small businesses could be talking to the AE firms or construction companies so that they can build relationships. While the large businesses are going to the industry days and other things, Small businesses are trying to go do the same thing with large businesses. Now, there is the industry days I was talking about, making connections. There's small business events specifically that small businesses can go and be able to share the capability statement and other information about the company with large businesses. It all comes back to building partnership and developing relationship. The key thing is the large business need to have a small business subcontracting plan, and that is the one that motivates large businesses to work with small businesses. Now, a small business can act like a large business, but one of the things that happens is most of the solicitations are so big, or their requirements may be so at a higher level that whether it's resources or qualifications that small business may not be able to compete, and that's when they go after and tie up with partnering with large businesses. All of this gives face time with the customer. In essence, they're trying to build relationships. In some cases, they build joint ventures that helps in building a relationship that will show them. There are several avenues where large businesses have benefits with making joint ventures with small businesses. Now we get into the capture. So when you get a solicitation, you see a solicitation, the first thing the large business would do is figure out what the requirements are, what the set-aside requirements are, what are the different regulations that they need so that they can make a go, no-go decision. While they're making a no-go decision, small businesses could be reviewing those contract documents to see what part of it that they can maintain so that start networking with a large business. The next part would be the key documents that make up the proposal, which is the qualifications, past performance, and PPQ. When you're working with the government, it's all about past performance. You almost work for past performance. They have such a good system. If you don't ever want to have a bad past performance, because that means your chances of winning projects decreases exponentially. So the PPQs, past performance questionnaires, some of the solicitations may have it, so you have to act ahead of time so that you get those things in a timely manner. And the large business respond to the PPQ, the solicitations. And a lot of the times, the solicitations for a lot of commissioning and engineering firms would be SF330, part 2 for the small businesses, part 1 for the large business. At the end of this is where you get an award. Award could be an IDIQ, which is an indefinite delivery, indefinite quantity, or a single award task order contract, or a multiple award task order contracts. These IDIQs and MATOCs are really good because those are 1, 2, 3, or 5 years long. And after the 5 years, it could be extended another 5 years. So that's a very nice way to be able to bring on projects. And that's good, not only good for the large business, the small business now, they're tied to them and they get task orders, which is a very good way of being able to build relationship, build past performance, and also build experience and be able to do a good work, actually. One of the things is, if there's any questions, feel free to ask the questions. I can stop and answer those questions. The next one I want to go over is the solicitation, how to understand this government solicitation. The solicitations could be it could be an issue for bid, RFP, or RFQ. It may ask admin requirements or price proposal or a technical proposal. They usually have an admin requirements, a technical proposal, and a price proposal. They're separate because the people trying to see the price will not be seeing the technical proposal evaluators will not be seeing the price. So that's how they differentiate to make sure that they can independently review the proposal without looking at the price or the technical aspect of it. Most of you are familiar with the SF330. That's the form. That's the professional qualification. Pretty much it's a standard form that goes through some of the qualifications. It goes through employees by discipline, firm's experience, and firm revenue. This is This pretty much puts together all of the information that they want to know what your capabilities are. This is a standard form, and what you see on the left is the part 1, which is a contract-specific qualification. And that's about, it could be anywhere from 10 to 20 pages. Sometimes and a solicitation may say, you cannot have more than X number of pages. When they say that, you have to meet with that. So that's part of the things when you're doing a thing with the government. All of the requirements have to be met, and if you don't meet those, they will give you feedback saying these are the things you didn't do right. This SF330 Part 2 is a general qualification, and this is what the small businesses or the subcontractors would submit. This is just a one-page form that has all of the information. That's a general qualification, and it's not contract specific. So let's now move on to the commissioning on what happens in the federal government. They employ total building commissioning, and total building commissioning is based on either the type of project, the size or complexity of the project, or the degree of interface with the utility infrastructure. So there is not a whole lot of guidelines saying where they all have to do commissioning, but the intensity of commissioning is not defined in one document. You've got to go to several documents or several places to determine what is applicable to the project. So we could have a new construction. There could be retro commissioning, once in response to a specific problem, or a recommissioning, which is periodic as part of O&M, or could be continuous commissioning. You heard all of this in on several seminars, so I won't go through any more of this, but just the fact that the key thing is it is specific to the project. Now, the government has a lot of paperwork, and there is no dearth for that, but also there's a lot of good documents out there. It's just a matter of how do you figure out all this. It's a maze, and over time you get to figure out the system. And once you figure out the system, it gets easier, whether it's the document you were looking for or why certain things are being done a certain way. The key thing we want to talk about is the Army, Navy, Air Force, and NASA came together and put together a unified facilities program. This applies to almost all of the projects that on a federal project. The first one we're going to talk about is the Unified Facilities Guide Specification. This is the specifications that people in the field would see. But what this is a generic specification that you can edit. And that editing, how do I get to, is there a pointer? Yeah, I got it, I'm sorry. So the whole building design guide has all of these specs on the website. It's public information. Those are in the Spec syntax software, which means they can be edited in that software. It's also available in PDF. And all of these specifications are per CSI master format. So this is one of the Unified Facilities Program. The next one set of documents are the criteria. These criteria could be planning, design, restoration, modernization. Any one of these projects, they have a criteria of how you can decide what needs to be done on a project based on the agency or based on the facilities or the mission or the field activities. In addition to this, there's a lot of references to codes and standards in there. In addition to this, they have engineering construction bulletins, there's engineering regulations, DoD handbooks, manuals. In addition to that, they have guidance from agencies and regional specifications. We have a whole bunch of documents that is there, and once you start working with the government in a specific department in a specific region, it becomes very clear that these are the kind of things you do, and it gets easier. But initially, you will see a whole maze of documents. In addition to all of the documents I talked about, we have the executive orders. The executive orders are the ones that the President of the United States signs off, and some of these could relate to energy efficiency, and one of them is the Meeting Guiding Principles EO 13514, or it could be some things related to sustainability. The other type of documents are like a policy document. This is the Army putting a policy document with, it's a NASA IEE sustainability document. This, in 2013, went back and said, these are the sustainability related requirements for the Army. And this was for the largest, for many years being used as the document to go after some of the Army projects in defining the scope of the project for commissioning. In addition to that, we may have statutes. The Congress may enact laws, and those could be like the Energy Improvement Act of 2015 or the EPA Act of 2005 or the ESA in 2007. So these are other things that you want to go take a look at so that the current projects are meeting the current regulations that are being introduced by the government. Now, now after all of these, we have more documents. This one, we have a document from the Engineering Construction Bulletin, ECB. This was in 2015. It's called Total Building Commissioning. It's a document that spells out what are the requirements for total building commissioning. In addition to that, there was another document from Engineer Regulations, ER 1110, which also defines total building commissioning. Now you may ask, why are there so many documents? Well, there are different agencies with different requirements, and it flows through the information. So it all depends on what the agency is and what document that's relevant, and that's how you go to this. But what I'm trying to tell you here is not get into the details, but being able to tell you that there is documents out there. It's a matter of where do you go for the documents, which documents apply, and what does apply for the project. It's kind of the scope definition for the project. In addition to this, there's agency sustainability guidelines or facility project requirements. There's the Energy Star label. There is the FEMP, Operation Maintenance Best Practices, a guide to achieving operational efficiencies. This document alone could be 200 pages, or there is ASHRAE guidelines and all of these things. So the sum total of all of this is what is being used to define project scope by the engineer, and at the same time, from the commissioning agent trying to define what the commissioning requirements are for the project. So the next we get to is the guiding principles. So as we talked about, the energy executive order went back and defined that the guiding principles have to be met. And so there was a document that was developed, which is, I'll show you, which is Guiding Principle for Sustainable Buildings. This was developed in 2016. They're saying these are the guiding principles by the 6 different areas. The areas that we talk about is the employ integrated design principles, optimize energy performance, protect and conserve water, enhance the indoor environment, reduce the environmental impact of materials, assess and consider building resilience. None of this, everything is very familiar to all of this. We've been talking about all of these, and this is very similar to everything else that we're talking about, except that it is structured in a way the government would like to see it. This document in 2016 was updated in December 2020, and that came out to be the Federal Leadership in High Performance and Sustainable Buildings, HBSB, Memorandum of Understanding. This document has been signed by 19 agencies and departments. So if this applies to all of the new work, replacement, sustainable restoration, modernization projects. So this is now a key document that is used among most federal projects for high performance and sustainable buildings. Again, this is the guiding principles, and then what happens is they took this document and then converted that to a requirements, the Unified Facilities Criteria. So the guiding principles now was converted to a requirements document, the UFC 1-200-02, and this is maybe a 20-page document, I'm not sure, but I can't recollect, but I know the document, I just don't know how many pages. But this particular document has been written such a way that it'll meet all of these requirements, whether it is the IGCC, IECC, or the ASHRAE Standard 2002, 90.1, 189.1 is optional. There are a few things that's not there because it's not a requirement in some places. ASHRAE 0, 1.1 guideline, then the lead building. So really, this requirement this UFC is put together that'll make sure it meets all of these requirements. So if we do meet this requirement, you are good to not only meet the requirements of the agency or the department that you're working with, but also some of the other codes and standards and guidelines that is in the industry. So, well, that again is a requirement. From there, we get to a specification. That UFC 1-200-02, from there we got to the UFGS commissioning specification. And that commissioning specification is 019100, total building commissioning. So that is the one document that we can go to, but that one document does not meet all of the agencies. So what came out of it in 2019, the Army came up with 019100.1510, which has been tailored to meet the Army requirements. Now, the Navy came back, they have certain different requirements, and that turned out to be 019100.1520. That's in 2020 they came up with. In 2021 came up with to a Navy specification. But that's not all of it. There is another spec, 014600.0006. That also is total building commissioning. But that has been Army Corps of Engineers, but that's a contractor hired CXA. So these are the key specification documents that you go look into. I know I've been throwing a lot of numbers. It's just trying to give you a flow of how things are. I'm not trying to get into details, but just trying to tell how to get to the documents. So if you look at this, the one on the left is the Army, and the one on the right is the Army Corps of Engineers. They're very similar write-up, but slightly different. Now, just to give you an example, on one particular project, I don't know which versions of the 0145. There are two versions of there's two versions of the 014600.0006. It's an Army Corps project, but one region uses one type of one, and there's another one for the other regions. So I never know which one to use, so I pretty much go ask the engineer, and the engineer asks the government, and somehow we get to figure out what it is, and that goes into the proposal documents. And if you see what I'm talking about is the design phase. So in the construction phase, none of this applies because you already see the document. This is all in the design phase where how the scope is being defined, and that's the phase I'm talking about. So I want to talk about a few things that's on the spec that defines qualifications. The first thing is the commissioning firm. The commissioning firm could be a first-tier subcontractor of general contractor, which is the Army Corps of Engineers, one of the specs. Or you could have the commissioning firm being contracted with the government, or you could be contracted with the AE. So there are three different options there, and you will see that in the specifications. And in the design phase, you pick the right specification and edit it so that you get all this put into place. Of course, we saw this, the firm certification could be by ACG, NAB, or all the different other agencies you're all familiar with. The next set of requirements could be the commissioning specialist. Now, in some departments, some agencies, you have a government CX specialist, CXG. And in some you don't. And in some of the firms, they may ask for not only a lead CX specialist, but based on the complexity of the project, you may have a mechanical CX specialist, or an electrical specialist, or a BECX. And among those specialists, you have a lot of different qualifications. So again, based on the type of the project, the size of the project, the complexity of the projects, some of these can be edited out to make sure that it applies to those projects.
contractor will get the job, will bid on the job, which is already done with the design phase.
Now, so okay, there is a design build project, and there's a design bid build project. This bid build project. So in a design bid project, the contractor in the design phase, the commissioning firm could be part of the AE firm, and then the specs that goes into the construction documents may say that the commissioning firm is subcontracted to the general contractor.
Yeah, which is not during the design phase, it will be after
That's
the
right.
start of the construction.
That's right. That's right. So a lot of the times we have two contracts. One on the design phase, and if we are continuing on the project, we'll have another contract on the construction phase.
So for the federal buildings, which one they prefer? They prefer to go directly or start direct at the design phase, or?
Okay. Commissioning is required in the design phase and construction phase. So typically what's going to happen is,
Which one they prefer? To be hired before starting the design, or during the design phase, or during the construction phase?
It's required to be hired before the 35% because you have to review the basis of design. So a lot of that is with the AE. So for the design phase, you don't have a spec. You don't have a spec. They just give you a contract based on a scope of work, and you.
There is a general spec, which is part of the OPR, but how do they know from the beginning that they have to be involved? It's a federal building.
As a federal building, the UFC 1-200-02 says that they have to be involved.
Okay.
So that is a requirement. And so you get involved at 15% or 35%. One of the two, based on some of the things. We get involved at 15%. We get the DD 1391, which is like an OPR. So we start off with the 15%, but in some cases we start off at the 35%. And just to give you an idea, there are some projects that we just are involved in the design phase, and we may never be involved in the construction phase. So because we are involved in the design phase, we will put a spec that says the general GC has to hire a commissioning agent, and they may not even get a bid from us. We don't even know who the general contractor is or who is bidding on those projects. So that's why there is all these different options. Did I explain to you? Any other questions? So design phase, this spec is being developed in the design phase. So we have relationships with, anybody can have relations with the AE firms, and so they will have a commissioning agent for the design phase. And in some projects, the same commissioning agent can move into the construction phase, or the GC could hire another commissioning firm. There are also some situations where the government hires an independent commissioning firm. We are involved in those too, where we are in the commissioning phase, in the design and construction. So there are several options based on the complexity of the project. So basically what I'm talking about is the spec will define the requirements, and in the design phase, we are making sure the right requirements are being put into the spec. Now, again, here's all many of the different systems that could be commissioned. Now, the requirements does not tell you what needs to be commissioned. So what we have to do right now is go back and see the many different possibilities. One of them, UFC 1-200-02. What does the UFC 1-200-02 high performance sustainable building requirements are? That's based on IGCC and IECC. So we look at the project size, project type of documents, and then based on this, define what systems that need to be commissioned, and then introduce that into the commissioning spec. Or if it's a lead project, we just look at what the lead requirements are and try to meet the lead requirements. For less complex buildings, we have other documents like I talked about, SDD policy or the AHA or the Navy Air Force project delivery. So you talk to the government. A government has a commissioning CXG. We can talk to them and define what scope is in what systems that need to be commissioned and put that into the spec. There are other sustainability goals. There is ASHRAE 189.1, large facility requirements. All of these put together help us decide which of the systems that needs to be commissioned. Again, we are talking about the design phase, and this is what goes into, this selection goes into the spec, which eventually goes into the contractors for bids. Now, I'm also going to continue on with the spec. What does the spec require and where the documents are? One of the things is all the pre-functional checks. One of them is the building envelope inspection. There are several templates available in the wbdg.org, Whole Building Design Guide. So you could, this spec references those specs, those checklists. And in there, they also define that they have to have at least 2 visits in the observe in progress construction and review the checklist. They ask you to witness and review the building envelope pressure test. Similar things are available for the pre-functional checks. Again, lots of templates. Now, while these templates are available, they could be used, or you can develop your own custom ones that meet some of the same requirements and use it. But just wanted to let you know that those are being available. In addition, they have manufacturer startup checklists. In fact, it's a requirement to get these manufacturer startup checklists done so that your warranty is in place for all the large equipment. Then we have the standard startup, tab, and controls verification tests. One of the key documents that's in the commissioning for construction is the readiness certificate. This is a requirement on federal projects. Now, it depends on which agency you are going into. And it basically says, without this, you cannot move into functional performance testing. And in different agencies deal with it differently, but the commissioning authority can go back and say, we are not going to go do functional performance tests until you get a readiness certificate. And that readiness certificate has to be signed not just by a GC, but the superintendent, the specialist, the quality control person, mechanical, electrical control staff, pretty much everybody in the team. Now, I know people are laughing, smiling, and all that. The thing is, how do we get this? Now, a lot of the times, some of our projects are out of town. Now, without this, I won't even book my airfare, my air tickets. You're not going until you get this. And it's in the spec. It's a contract requirement. It's pretty much without this, we wouldn't even go to the next phase. And if you talk to the government, they will say the same thing. Without this, you won't go to the functional performance testing. In fact, if you look at the specs, some of them say you have to get 2 weeks before. Some of them say you got to get 3 weeks before. So you have enough in place to stand your ground. As commissioning agents, you can say this is a requirement. You don't have to do anything until you get it. Go ahead, please.
Define to a contractor in the government that you're going to waste 2 weeks of their time while this certificate is submitted. And then the other thing would be is, doesn't the certificate duplicate what your pre-functional test checklists are supposed to provide? Because if you're not on a government job and you're on a real world job, you would not waste time, money, and effort and schedule to do a readiness certificate. You would say, pre-functional test checklists are complete. That's the contractor saying, I'm ready to move to functional testing. And you as a commissioning are supposed to go out and verify and confirm the PFTCs. So we hate readiness certificates. We edit them out of all the specs. But we've got one guy at the core that says, oh, it's absolutely necessary because you can't do it without it until we have one project out of 24 that has a readiness certificate on it, and now the contractor has to go back in and change his schedule to add 14 days into an already super tight schedule.
Yep. Okay. I'll give you a different example. I wouldn't do a project without the readiness certificate. I'll tell you one thing. Many years ago, I was saying, okay, well, I asked for a readiness certificate. They said, no, we can do it. I flew out to Baltimore, went into this building. There was water all over on the ground. They had a problem. So I had every check filled out. I go in there, I just took the next plane and got back because I couldn't do any functional performance testing. So
to go to the government, because your contract is based on that, to say they're not ready, or if they show up, like you said, and he's saying if you show up, they're not ready, and they've signed that certificate, they have to pay you.
yes,
Maybe back whether I have that certificate or not. The certificate is basically a sledgehammer the government uses to say this or that. But the thing would be is it's a piece of paper that provides what? I mean, what did your pre-functional checklist not cover? And why didn't you go out and verify it before? If your contract says, I don't show up on site until the end of the project, you're not committed.
no, I'm not trying to say we're not going. We're just saying that particular thing.
Correct. From a pre-functional checklist. And so
It's all about
the point is, it's
paperwork.
their obligation. Commissioning is documenting completion, not creating a punch list. And so
Commissioning
they've
is
got to
going
be
all the
finished.
way through to verify that the final result works.
That's
And if
true.
you're not going to be there during the construction, this is where you have to get your government agency and your contractor and your designer and everybody to understand is you're there to assure an outcome. You're not there to show up at the end and say, oh, I fact checked it. You need to be out at the site, you need to be part of the construction. You need to know that that system is up and operating. You don't rely upon the contractor for 100% of that. You are your own ears and eyes on the job site. So if you're not going out to the job site to verify this prior to this,
Okay, I can give you a different example. I'll give you a different example. The contractor did not give us a readiness certificate. And they forced me, saying, come on over, because they were tight, they wanted to finish the project. I said, I will come, but you're wasting one of my trips. If it's not accepted, you'll have to pay for my another visit. We went and did the functional performance testing. The government did not show up. They were there, but they did not participate in the functional performance testing. So we finished all the functional performance testing. The next 2 days later, the government sent back and said, the readiness certificate was not ready. You got to do the readiness certificate and do this all over again. So we went and did it all over again. So I'm not trying to say, but the thing is that's a contract requirement, and they paid me extra, but no, I said, I'm not coming, I'm wasting. I told them we can't do this because it's a contract. It's not only about doing the right thing, but the most important thing that you got to take away is, if it's in the contract, it's a contract requirement, you got to do it. It's taxpayers' money, and that's how they see that. And if that's what it is, that's what needs to be done. So that's the difference between a lot of private projects and a federal project. The contract is so important that anybody can go back and say, it is in the contract, you have to deliver it. At the same time, if it's not in the contract and they ask us to do things, we have every right to ask for the money to compensate for our effort, and the government will do that. Because while they're not asking us to do any free stuff, they are all, at the same time, they're asking us to deliver on everything that's been asked for.
well, I guess a lot of it would depend on who you're working for.
Yes.
The general contractor, are you working for the AE, or are you working directly for the government? So it should be on this.
But here's the thing, let me go back and say, let me put it another way. It's not about 2 weeks. It's not about 2 weeks. All I say is, give me the readiness certificate, I'll be there next week. So,
But then the job is for 2 weeks in it, they should put it in their schedule.
Show up, they actually are. I mean, you never told you that they're ready to come.
What you're stating is 100% correct, because I do federal.
once, can we get to?
Yes.
We are an asset, and they don't want to upset.
The person over there.
If you have a question, just raise your hand and I'll bring you the microphone.
I know this, I didn't think you will have so many questions, but that's good.
No, what you're saying is 100% correct. I commission federal jobs, and I've been asked to come onto the job and do FPT prior to the contractor submitting certificate of readiness. The exact thing happened. The documentation was not submitted because as a commissioning authority, I have to provide documents saying, I received this, yes, it is ready for commissioning. Since it was not provided, I had to do a return site visit to conduct it, which I had to charge extra for.
Yes.
So it is true, you're 100% correct on that process.
Thank you. It's all it is it's not about the 2 weeks, it's not about the 1 week. It's the documentation. If it's really ready, what is the bit where they can just sign off this document? They don't sign it off because they're not sure or they don't want to sign it. That's where we come in and just give us the document. It'll help all of us. Oh. 1 page. Well, here's the thing. No, I'm sorry. I'm sorry. We have a custom readiness certificate. What we have is they have 5 things to check out. If these 5 things are done, which is the PFC, the startup is done, the tab is done, the O&M table of contents is done, then they can sign off either all systems are ready or pick whatever system that is there and give us that. So it could be 1 system, 5 systems, or all of the systems. So depending on the complexity of the project, it could be 1 page or it could be 5 pages based on the number of systems. They can just check off which project systems that they want to ready. We'll go do that. It's just a standard, it's just a document where just check off and sign, and that is the superintendent. Well, here's the project. We were in a Navy project. Every one of them had to sign, including the government. I mean, if the government doesn't sign it, it's not signed. The Navy, let's go back and say, this is the Navy where Navy sometimes goes one level up. I'm there. But look at this, it's not the general contractor. It is as a commissioning agent, I have to sign off. Mechanical, electrical, control staff, and reviewed by and signed by the government.
I believe the UFGS Spec Division 23 also requires endurance testing. So you talk about the time involved. I mean, you've got to have the systems complete, and then they've got to run trends.
But that's all.
It's a matter of them documenting a complete facility is operating under control. It's not hard. It's just they don't do it.
Yeah. So what happens is I go to the commissioning kickoff meeting, and this is the one document I talk about. I talk about it twice, maybe thrice, saying, please make sure this is the document. I just go back and say, when we come to this, you will see this as an issue, but we got to do this right, and to do this right, sign it off. At that time, they'll say, no problem, everything is great at the kickoff meeting. And then comes the functional performance testing. That's what it is. But here's the thing. The U.S. Navy asked for 3 weeks. The 3 weeks is not for us. They want 3 weeks to be able to schedule their person to come to the functional performance testing. So if they're willing to wait 3 weeks, then that's what is the problem with the general contractor to put the 3 weeks into the schedule. All they have to do is put it in the schedule and plan for it, because it's in the contract.
Just when you're doing the design build and they did 24 projects without it and then required on the 25th one without putting it into the RFP, the contractor gets to ask for a 2-week extension to his schedule, which requires months.
I understand, yes, there's all kinds of things, yes. But that's why I go to the commissioning kickoff meeting. I bring it up to everybody to understand this is what it is. And they are very well aware that I highlight this and repeat it, and after the meeting talk about it, because that's the one document we all have to be work on it and discuss that so that everybody's on the same page. Any other questions? Okay, this is good discussion. This is good. 10 more minutes. So anyway, I'll move fast here. Again, same thing with functional performance testing. We have the WBDG that has all these. We have sensor calibration, control sequences, safeties, interlocks, and all those standard checks that we do. We have seasonal deferred tests, integrated tests. A lot of the checklists are available. Now we come back to the contract documentation. Here is what we talked about. If it is required in the spec, we got to do it. Submittals. If it's a submittal, it is a submittal. And we just make that so all the submittals that's required has to be done. And then the system readiness, certificate of readiness. As you see, I pull it out as a separate line item for all of these because that is a key document. Then we have project lead requirements. We also have the HPSB guiding principle compliance. There's a checklist that says how do we meet the guiding principles. That also has to be updated on an ongoing basis. In fact, it has to be started in the design phase because a lot of them starts off in the design phase and ends in the construction phase with that. So now there are several resources. I can't name all of them, but just a few of these to start off with. The System for Award Management, SAM.gov, Small Business, SBA.gov, the PTACs are the ones who help small business be able to guide them, help market their business. And there's also a pronet.spa.gov, which helps small business market it. They have several assistants for small businesses. It could be a contracting guide, or it could be different certifications that they can help with, whether it is WASB, which is women-owned, or service-disabled, veteran-owned, 8A, HubZone. All of those come under one place. There's a federal acquisition regulations. This is about 20,000 or 30,000 pages. Don't understand all of this, and only the contracting officer may understand most of that stuff, but still we have to meet all of those requirements. So not necessarily we have to go through all of this, we just need to understand some of the higher level requirements and be able to, as you learn more about the federal projects, you learn more about these contracting requirements, whether it comes to overhead pricing or how you price it for IDIQs, and all those things are all built into that. There's Office of Federal Sustainability, whole building design guide, which we talked about, where the checklists are, where the specs are, the criteria are. Then there's USDA.gov, which pretty much takes you to all the different places. There's DOE. Then there's also the agency websites. The whole suite of resources. I'm going to move into lessons learned, project phasing and timing. This is one of those things where I started working on a project in 2010. I thought it would be done in 2 years, so my proposal was pretty standard, 2 years, a small project, be done, and things like that. And then a week after I gave my proposal, started doing the design work, they said, oh, only the design has been approved. Congress will approve the construction 5 years later. So now I put a bid, and now I didn't know that it was 5 years later. 2016, we started the project. In 2018, we had a problem. The GC just quit and he left. So they had a lot of legal stuff, and they got a bonding company to come back and get another GC to come in and fix it. While all this was done, 5 years, the building was all vacant and ready to go, but vacant. And next week, 11 years after I started, they're going to occupy the building. So you see a lot of these can happen with federal buildings. And coming to think of it, this may not happen in a private company. The reason this happens is the contract requirements. There are requirements that they will even keep it vacant for 5 years. So we were talking about 2 weeks. Now this is 5 years, a building is unoccupied, just waiting for the contract to be done so that they can open. The opening ceremony is next week, actually. So just to give you a reference point. Site visits, sometimes you've got to make sure you read the specifications. If you miss out on key things, we're saying monthly site visits, you lost a lot of money if you didn't account for all the site visits. They may ask you to be there on site if it is called out in the contract. CX, then there is, in some projects, there's a CXG, which is the government commissioning agent. If that is there, then you have to sometimes do commissioning first and then witness it and show it to the government a second time in some special situations. Or you have to make sure that the CXG is in line with what you're doing and be able to work with them to make sure you meet the contract requirements. In all of this, understand the contract requirements. Make sure you understand what the specs call for, what the drawings and documents call for. understand contract requirements, submittal requirements and specification. There are some security requirements. I got into a project where it was so secure that the project manager had to be with me all the time. And while I'm doing functional performance testing, I have a project manager who's so busy trying to escort me, and you feel guilty that he has to be with you, but that's the way sometimes it works. So you got to plan for security requirements, high performance sustainability guiding principle compliance. The checklist, I got into a US Navy project where this was very different, where not only will the checklist need to be signed off as a whole, every line item in the functional performance test checklist had to be signed by subcontractors. So imagine we have 100 pages of a checklist. And if everything has 20 checks on every page, that's 2,000 signatures. But we did that on one of the projects because that's actually what the specifications ask for. We don't do that, but one of the good places, they said that's what it's required, do it. So the contract requirements is what matters, and it's the interpretation of what the requirements are. And this special emphasis on, that's why I wanted to call out that is because the importance of what is called out in the spec. That's what I have, and this was just my way of sharing some of my experience on federal projects. I know you all have a vast variety of experiences, and you may all be able to share that. If there's anything, you can ask me questions or be willing to share some things on the project or one of your experiences.
I'll bring you the microphone.
I think I'm loud enough. You had a discussion about the different partnership programs and different things. Have you ever been part of or helped with a mentor program?
Yes, we have. We have had several mentors, actually. We graduated from an 8A program. So 8A is a mentorship. Another thing is when the mentorship that you get is not technical as such. You could get lots of technical mentorship, but it's all the business understanding. We don't have enough resources as small business to understand. So we got a mentorship that helps us not only in the financial stuff, the business operation, the marketing, and also the operation. But not only that, you understand how some of the business works. Then we moved on to, after we graduated, we moved on to all small business mentor protege. So even after the 8A 9-year program, we have another mentor. So the mentor, when the mentor mentors us, they actually become a small business. So there's a win-win situation the government has set up. So it'll help not only us, it helps them too. So it's a win-win. And to answer this, yes, we have a good mentor, we have a great relationship. Sometimes these relationships don't get to any reasonable projects, but sometimes it just works out so well that you work as a team and it works out great. So we've been working with one mentor for the last decade. We're also working with lots of other large businesses. They may not be a structured mentor, but they mentor us because we have a partnership where we feel like we are their preferred commissioning provider. Did I answer your question?
For Space Force
Yes.
projects, do we default to the Air Force guidelines or the aeronautical guidelines?
Okay. We are working on a first Space Force project myself.
So am I, that's why I ask, yeah.
So maybe next year I can answer the question better. But we are working on a project, and so today we will use I believe the Air Force AFCAC today. And I've asked this question about what is the requirement that we haven't got an answer. I believe we will use the AFCAC. But the thing is, the Space Force is going to become bigger than the Air Force in the next 5-10 years. I don't know the timeline, but that's how it's going to be. So that's going to become very structured. So the answer is I don't know, but I'll know soon.
Do you think we'll end up with separate guidelines that are specific to Space Force, or do you think they'll just redo the Air Force to include guidelines?
yes, just like we saw the spec for Army, Navy, we may have a separate one for the Space Force. So it's the same unified program. It'll be modified to meet the requirements. This is what my expectation is, and that's what I think. Well, thank you very much. I enjoyed this as much as you, I hope. And this is wonderful. I do work on federal projects a lot, so this is a great way for me to share my experience. Thank you.
Great presentation. Thank you so much.
Thank you much.